Howdy, folks. Welcome to another episode of the Preparedness Podcast, the podcast that brings you the best in preparedness information. You can find us online at thepreparednesspodcast.com. My name is Rob Hannes, and I am the host for the show. If you would like to email me, you can do so by emailing me at rob@prepcast.info. Before we get in the show, just a couple announcements. Really, I think I only have one, and that is the listener survey. If you haven't taken it yet, getting some really good comments and feedback through there. It's completely anonymous. If you go to the website, you're going to see on the left-hand side listener survey button. If you click there, you go to the PodTrack survey. If you fill that out, I'd appreciate it. Also, while you're on the website, go ahead and check out the sponsors that we have listed on the right side of the website. These are the vendors that are currently sponsoring the website and the podcast, and we really appreciate their support. And if any of them are carrying a product that you're considering buying, if you would click through the banner and buy through them, then you would also be helping to support the podcast and the website, and we would appreciate that as well. And of course, while you're sitting at the computer looking at the website, you might as well head on over to Facebook and like us on Facebook as well. You can find us at facebook.com/thepreparednesspodcast. And go ahead and follow us on Twitter. If you have a Twitter account, you can find us at Prepcast on Twitter. Facebook, we're posting a lot of time. Well, you'll be able to know when the shows come out. We're trying to do some more pictures and questions and stuff like that on Facebook and Twitter. When I come across a news article that I think is prep-related or I think is important enough to share, I usually go ahead and post it out through Twitter instead of trying to make a full blog post or write something up. I'll just go ahead and share it on Twitter, and that's a great way to share news information and get some direct communications going. The topic for this podcast is going to be lessons from Hurricane Sandy. Just going through some of the news stories and articles about the hurricane and what's been going on and stuff. It's not necessarily anything spectacular or more spectacular than any other hurricane that hits the United States, but there's always lessons to be learned, and I think it's always important to review what's going on because this helps us become better prepared because we can take a look at what's going on and we can apply it to our situation and say, could I do that, or do I have this, or can I be able to handle this? And you can look at your plan or your preps and see if you are able to handle that. Also, I think that by getting ourselves acclimated to what can happen, looking at the damage, looking at the flood waters and stuff, and trying to visualize what it would be like if that happened to us or around us, or if we were in that situation, it allows us to react better and faster because we're not wasting our time trying to figure out what we should do or even overcome the sensation of, oh my gosh, it really happened. I can't believe it. That sort of pausing and that sort of hesitation can actually have detrimental effects, especially in a time where you need to react quickly. So I just want to go over some of the observations that I've had about the hurricane. It's only been a few days, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot more information that comes out. But right now at this time, I think there's some issues and some lessons we can learn from it and to help us become better prepared because, you know what, we never know when the next time is going to be us. Before we discuss that, though, I'd like to talk about our sponsor for the podcast, seedsnow.com. Last time I talked about seedsnow.com, I told you about these really cool hydroponic kits that they have. And apparently they're very popular because they're completely sold out and they're back-ordered. Back-ordered means you can still order them, but they're going to ship in about a week. And these kits, if you didn't hear it last time, are really cool. It's just like this little kind of a square sort of white box. It looks a lot like one of the old Mac Mini shapes as far as shape and a little bit taller. And basically, it's got an insert. You put some water in there and it starts growing, and you need to put some batteries because the batteries are they're going to cycle the fluid around the plants. It looks like a really neat thing. Apparently, it's wildly popular because they've already sold out. And I think it's just one of the type of products that you're going to find at seedsnow.com that really kind of neat, kind of exciting, but you can also just get, typical standard seeds for your garden. This is now fall, of course. We just had Halloween, and never too soon to start planning your spring garden, especially if you're going to grow plants from seeds, because you typically want to, start them indoors where it's a little bit warmer before you transplant them outside. Also, if you're in an area that you can grow in the winter, you may want to think about that too. Now, you may be saying to yourself, you know what, I don't really know what I should grow here in the winter because I got some pretty warm winter months ahead of me, but I'm not really sure what to grow. You know what? The Seeds Now people, they're really, really nice people. And if you call them up and you tell them where you live and, where you would like to grow and stuff, they're going to help you find out what seeds you can grow and when to plant them and stuff like that. So it's really not as difficult as trying to figure out this all on your own. Also, the Seeds Now people are extending a discount for the listeners of the Preparedness podcast. So whether you call them up or whether you go to the website, seedsnow.com, or if you go to my website and click on their banner, let them know that you heard about them through the Preparedness podcast and use this coupon code, PREP10, PREP10, and you'll get 10% off your order. That's seedsnow.com. Okay, now let's go over some things that we can learn from Sandy. Hurricane Sandy struck the U.S. on Monday night, October 29th, and it's only a few days later, but we can already start to learn some important lessons from it, especially for those of us that are preppers. Now, we already know that a lot of the population will disregard these lessons, but those of us who want to be prepared, here's what we can take from it. Disasters that cause the biggest problems aren't usually the ones that we're expecting. For example, Sandy wasn't really expected to make landfall in the U.S., and if it did, it wasn't expected to be anything more than a tropical storm. It was starting to lose its energy. I mean, it hit the Jamaica and those islands down there pretty hard. I think it killed like 80 people or something like that. But, it was losing energy, and it really wasn't even forecasted to hit the United States. But then suddenly it strengthened and it sped up, and then it made that weird 90-degree turn, and it slammed into the Jersey coast. Now, this means that if you weren't watching and staying top of the situation, and if you weren't already somewhat prepared, there wasn't a whole lot of time to get ready once it was clear what was happening and what was going to happen. And the lesson in this is that, even though something doesn't seem like it's going to be an issue, but there's even a far off, out of left field possibility or potential for something to happen, you should keep an eye on it. New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg stated that this is once in a long time storm. Unfortunately, he's probably wrong. The weather and climate cycle for the Earth is changing, and it's likely that we're going to see more and more storms like this, and these storms are going to have greater damage. We've already seen some hurricanes like this already. Katrina was one of them, and this is the cycle we're in. It's going to cause greater damage from the storms that are here. So I probably won't be as long as Mayor Bloomberg is hoping. And if you look at the Wikipedia entry for New York hurricanes, you'll see that it's quite likely that New York City is going to get hit again in the near future. So this kind of goes along with the thought of don't be a bandwagoner and just think, oh, well, we've had the hurricane, so we're done. We won't have any more in my lifetime. I don't have to worry about it, because that's how you get in trouble with not expecting disasters in your area. Right now, millions of people are homeless. Many people have completely lost their home. Some people, their home has been condemned. It's still there, but it either was weakened because of the floodwaters and from the surge, or a tree fell on it, or some other structural damage. And when a house is condemned, that means you can't go into it. You are not allowed by law to go into your own house for any reason. Now, a lot of times you will be able to get some stuff if it's somewhat structurally sound. You won't be able to live in it, but a lot of times they will allow you to get in there. So if your house were to be condemned, then you need to try to contact the authorities to see if you can work out a time for you to go in and make a mad dash for the most important items. Millions of people are still without electricity right now, and many will be without power for the next week. This is going to have a huge issue, as it always does, because everything we do in some manner or form relies on electricity. There are countless stories right now of New Yorkers being unable to charge their cell phones because there's no power. People are tapping into lampposts that apparently has a little Edison plug down there that they can tap into. A lot of restaurant owners are charging up phones or allowing phone charging service with a generator that they have. Even restaurants that don't have power, they're pulling out grills and stuff. And so, it's okay for a little bit of time, but every day that goes on without power, life becomes more and more complex. And, you don't have hot water. You don't have a way to recharge batteries. You can't keep your refrigerator running. All the food in your freezer starts to melt and goes bad. And there's tons of things out there that we use electricity for, computers and lights and all sorts of appliances, your washing machine to get your clothes clean. None of this stuff runs if you don't have an alternate way to provide power. Suddenly you have a various amount of paperweights and all sorts of shapes and sizes because you can't do anything with this. And this is one of the reasons why having electricity is very important, or having the manual or the analog backups for them. So instead of electric lights and lamps, you can have kerosene lamps, battery lamps, you could have candles. Those sort of things are important. And this is, again, just one of the things that we try to do by being prepared, is to have alternate ways of maintaining our current standard of living. So maybe instead of electric light, we have a kerosene lamp, but still we have light. And that is very important to maintain comfort, convenience, and some sort of semblance of normalcy, because that's what we strive for. That's what we need. That's what is going to keep us sane. That's going to keep us happy. That's what's going to keep our families safe. Speaking of keeping your family safe, right now many parts of New York and New Jersey are still flooded, or they have the debris and the leftover from floodwaters. Now, floodwater is very nasty stuff. It's got everything in it. It's got, it's seawater, of course, but it has sewage, raw sewage. It has oil and gasoline and chemicals and petrochemicals. And it's got all sorts of nasty stuff in it that you do not want to especially have your children around or playing in, because they don't know enough to not touch their face, their eyes, or put their hands in their mouth, and that is basically them putting a lot of nasty contaminated water into their system, which would not be good. Also, right now there is a lot of looting and crime that is going on in these areas. The power is out, so at night you're going to have, crime is going to skyrocket, because they know not only are the alarm systems off, the lights are out, but because of the debris that's all over the roads, it's very difficult for law enforcement to respond, because even if they're trying to get into an area, if there's a tree down across the road, or a power pole, or a lamp, or cars that are pushed by the floodwaters and blocking certain avenues and stuff, the police can't get there, and they know this. And so even though it may not be reported as much, we can be assured that there is a lot of crime happening. And unfortunately, every day that goes by without electricity, criminals seem to get more and more bold in what they're doing. So hopefully they're going to get the power on as soon as possible. But the lesson from this is that without law enforcement, you need to be able to protect yourself and protect your family and your belongings. Communications are out for millions of people. Millions and millions of people. Not only do they not have television, but a lot of these people have what they call a triple package, I guess. Like, for example, that's what I have. I have my cable TV, I have my internet access, and I have my phone, all being provided by the same provider, which actually isn't really a good idea, because if that service provider goes down, I lose all of that stuff. Probably in this case, it doesn't really matter because everything is down. The cell towers are down. They don't know when they're going to get up. I mean, millions of people can't make a call because there's very few cell towers that are working, and those that are working are being overloaded. This is why it's important to have an AM/FM radio or even an AM/FM shortwave radio, because you would still be able to pull distant radio stations. Even if the affected area doesn't have any radio stations, nearby states or nearby cities will have the information and they'll be putting it out. Another good radio to have would be a NOAA weather radio. It's an all hazards radio, so they would be putting out information about the disaster both before, during, and after. And all you need for these radios is really the radio itself and the batteries to power it, which is much less complex than trying to rely on the infrastructure that's needed for internet or even cell phones, because you have so much more complexity there. So it's always good to have these types of radios with you. You can expect a lot of confusion from everyone, even those that are supposed to be in charge. Just because they're in charge doesn't mean they know how to handle the situation, or they have the right information, or they know what to do. This is where having a plan where everybody in your family knows what they're supposed to do. So, for example, they know where to go. They know what rally points they need to be if they can't be at home. Your communication plan includes, where to meet up. That's very important, because if you can't communicate, at least you know where you can meet up if you can't meet up at home. Also, you want to have an out-of-state contact. So if you can make a call, a lot of times local to local calls won't go through, but local to long distance calls will. So, make Grandma or Aunt Susie your bulletin board, and everybody calls that out of state contact and leaves messages. That way, at least you'll be able to know that everybody's okay, even if you can't meet up with them right away. Again, a lot of the times we get hit or blindsided by things that we're not expecting. So in this hurricane, even though a lot of the disaster included massive amounts of rain and flooding, fires still burnt down scores of houses and buildings, burned them right down to the ground. So, you might be expecting rain and floodwaters, but yet you have to deal with a fire. And in one case, there was like 50 or 80 houses that all burnt in the same area, that the fire just ran unchecked because the emergency services couldn't get to the area because the flooding made it unavailable. They weren't able to get to that area, so there was nothing anybody could do but to let it burn. Many gas stations are either without power or they're running low on gas, and those that do have power have very long lines and are rationing fuel. All the pictures I saw, there aren't any cars in line at the gas stations. It's all people with gas cans. So, of course, it's important to have your own gas supply, or at least keep your car tank filled up. Now, it just occurred to me that one of the alternate energy forms that I don't talk about is your car. Your car has the ability to charge a battery. You can plug it in and charge your phone. You can charge all sorts of other accessories as well as run them and stuff. And if you have an inverter, you could even run your car to keep your freezer or your refrigerator going periodically. Now, of course, you're using up gas, and you're going to have to replace that gas when it's used up. And probably it's fairly inefficient as a way to provide, AC power, but it is a method that you could look at as far as one of your backups. One of the things I noticed with this Hurricane Sandy, and it seems to be fairly common in big disasters, and that is disasters aren't like the movies where the aftermath is on a warm day filled with sunshine and everybody is happy and in shorts and T-shirts. No, usually it's often cold, wet, and dark after a disaster. If you look at the pictures of the New Yorkers, they're all in jackets, and they got hats and gloves on, and they're trying to keep their ears warm because it's not winter, but it's pretty cold there. So now you've got to deal with the fact that maybe you don't have a house and you don't have any place to go, or you have to go to shelter, or wherever you're going, it's cold, and you can't even stay warm in your car because there is no transportation because all the streets are clogged. Even if you decide to shelter in place, which basically means you're going to ride it out at home, you still need to be ready to evacuate on a moment's notice. there were several news stories of people who had to be evacuated in the middle of the storm for one reason or another. A fire, or a tree falls down on the house or the car that they were in and they got injured, or, in one case, the facade of an apartment building fell off and exposed the apartments inside. You need to be ready to go if, for whatever reason, you can't stay at your house any longer. If you're traveling through an area that is forecasted for a major event like this hurricane, you probably should get out ASAP, because otherwise you're going to be stuck there for quite a while without the support of having any of your gear with you, or having a home base. Now, especially if you're flying, you typically aren't going to have a lot of your gear with you. Even if you have some of your everyday carry stuff with you, you're not going to have all the gear that you may normally have if you were at home or near home or even traveling by car. I suppose you could go to an Army, Navy surplus store, or you go to an outdoor gear supplier like REI or Sportsman's Warehouse or something like that, and kind of gear up if you have the money. But it might just be simpler to get out of the area as soon as possible, whether that means you have to rent a car and get out and get out of the potentially damaged area. You'd probably be a lot better off. If you have to evacuate, and evacuate for something major like this, where your house may very well be damaged or even partially damaged, and if you have the time, you should shut off the electricity, water, and gas mains. Now, please note that shutting off the gas mains could mean that it's a long time before you can turn it back on, because a lot of places require that the gas company do it for you. However, you have to weigh the alternative, because it could mean the difference between your house burning down or being there when you get back. Now, without communications, yes, you can't use your phone, you can't use the internet and stuff like that. But also, cash is king suddenly, because you can't use credit cards, you can't clear checks. If you don't have the cash with you, you won't be able to buy things. And you can see that there's still business going on. There are still some restaurants open. There are still people doing some sort of trade. And, this is the way it always will be. That's why you need to have some form of currency. Now, right now, the dollar is just fine and you can use it. But in other disasters, you might not to. So you need to keep that in mind. And, of course, the last thing I want to point out in these observations is that things return to normal. Now, it's only been a few days since the hurricane has struck, but there are a lot of stories out there where people, that's what they're trying to do, the recovery and the return to normalcy, because things always will want to go back to normal. No matter how bad it gets, things go back to normal. And you need to keep this in mind, because you can't think suddenly, it's the end of the world and there's no law and I can do whatever I want, because when we do go back to normalcy, you're going to be held accountable for all the things that you do. Now, before I wrap up this podcast, I would just like to go over the lessons again. I think there's a lot that we can take away from this. And actually, I think the lessons that we can learn from this disaster are pretty much what we talk about here on the Preparedness Podcast. The first thing I would say is you need to have a plan. You need to know what you're going to do in an emergency or a disaster. And you need to know what your trigger events are. Now, we just covered that in the last podcast. You need to know what the trigger events are so you know when to take action and what that action will be. Even if your preparedness plan doesn't cover the specific event, you should have a general plan that covers at least these two things. You need to know what you're going to do when you shelter in place, and you need to know what you're going to do if you're going to evacuate, because those are the two main parts of your plan. You're either going to stay or you're going to go, and you need to know how to decide whether you're going to stay or go. And once you make that decision, you need to know what you're going to do so that you can stay or go. And if you stay, you need to prep to go just in case. If you can have this as your basic plan, then you will be able to handle most events that come up. Now, you should still make a plan for each of the major categories. Like if you live in a hurricane area, you should plan what you're going to do for a hurricane, because there's a lot of things that you need to do in order to survive a hurricane. Even if you decide to evacuate, you still need to prep your house because you know you're going to be returning. The key thing to keep in mind with your plan is that it needs to be flexible so you can adapt your plan as necessary. You need to have supplies and equipment on hand to be self-reliant for a minimum of 2 weeks. Now, we hear a lot about the need for a 72-hour kit or to be able to take care of yourself for 72 hours. But honestly, in any major disaster that's going to affect you, it's going to leave you on your own for much longer than 72 hours. And we can see that in this disaster. People are going to be without power for at least a week in some areas. And so you need to be ready, I think, for 2 weeks as a minimum. Now, at one point, I'm pretty sure FEMA had come out and was beginning to recommend that people be ready for a 2-week period of time. However, I think, and I'm not sure, but I think they've kind of backtracked from that, and I think they've kind of gone back to the 72 hours, which clearly, as you can see, isn't enough. And if you go back and look at, say, the tornadoes in Springfield or the disaster in Japan or any major earthquake, 3 days, basically you could sit with a blanket to stay warm and a gallon of water and make it through 3 days. It's probably is something you could do. It's the fact that you have to last longer than that. You need a lot more than that. So I would say 2 weeks is probably a minimum. And you need to have these supplies and this gear before the disaster is forecasted or strikes. Now, if the event is predictable, like a hurricane, once everyone knows that it's coming, it's going to be difficult or near impossible to get prepared. If the event is not predictable, like an earthquake, once it strikes, it's too late to prepare. You need to be prepared before. Your family communication plan should not rely on infrastructure that you don't control. Quite honestly, this means that you and your spouse or somebody in your family need to get amateur radio licenses and learn how to communicate via radios. That's the only way you're going to be able to talk to somebody else that isn't on a phone or internet or anything, because there is no other infrastructure needed. You can talk radio to radio. Now, there's more that goes on with this as far as which frequencies and how far they can go, but you'll learn that in your amateur radio classes. So, honestly, amateur radio is the only way, it's the only method available to civilians that allow you to communicate without having to have any reliance on the power grid or communication lines or telephone lines or cell towers or anything. You can do it all on your own. With no law enforcement or restricted law enforcement or a reduction in law enforcement, you're going to have to provide for your own security. And this means that you're going to have to take matters in your own hand. Now, I'm not saying you need to go Mad Max on somebody, but you need to be able to protect you, your family, your children, your belongings, your household. You need to be able to secure that so either A, you keep the bad guys out, or if the bad guys do get in, then it's them and not you. You need to be able to provide your own shelter, your own warmth, your food, your water, your sanitation, and everything else you need to survive, and everything your family needs to survive until things return to normal. In a nutshell, it's far better to have it and not need it than it is to need it and not have it. And to me, and I think most preppers, this is the point about being prepared, is that we want to have it just in case we need it. Now, we hope that we never need it. We talk about a lot of things. We're talking about hurricanes. We're talking about hyperinflation. We're talking about EMP. We're talking about, all sorts of things and how we can be prepared for those. But you know what? I hope we never need these preps. I hope that the preparations that you take and the preps that you buy, you'll never need them. I hope that life continues to be normal and every day is better than the last. But you know what? Real life suggests that things might not go that way. And so we need to have preps and we need to be prepared. Now, what we've been talking about are lessons that we've learned from Hurricane Sandy. But, you know what? These lessons are the same. The observations and the effects of the disaster are pretty much the same no matter what the disaster is. Sure, you might not have a lot of flooding and an earthquake, but you're still going to have a lot of damage, destruction, and confusion. You're going to have power outages. You're going to have lack of communications. You're going to have the ability to provide your own clean water, your own shelter if your house is damaged, your own security, and so on. And I think the overall lesson that we can learn from this is that it's better to be prepared than not prepared. Now, before I sign off on the podcast, I just wanted to make one final comment, and that was this week we hit 400,000 downloads on the podcast. And of course, we would not have been able to approach that number at all if it wasn't for you listeners downloading and listening. And so I want to thank you for downloading. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for telling your friends and family about us. And I want to let you know that it means a lot to us that you're taking the time to write and comment, and whether you're tweeting or on Facebook or emailing us directly or going through the website, it means a lot to us, and we really appreciate it. I really appreciate it, so I want to say thank you. And until next time, enjoy life and be safe.